September 11th took place many years ago, it is still fresh in the minds of many, many Americans. There are countless stories of the things that took place on that fateful day. Many people helped one another and the country was united like never before. Here are the stories of some of the heroes of that day. Tom Burnett stormed the cockpit on Flight 93. Photo credit, Pinterest/Lori Brown. Tom was the vice president of a medical supply company in California. When he began his day on September 11th, he had no idea that he would become a major hero in American history. He boarded Flight 93, scheduled to travel from Newark to San Francisco. The plane was hijacked by the terrorists. It is believed that the hijackers intended to crash the plane into the U.S. Capitol. Todd was able to call his wife Tina several times while aboard the flight. She informed him about the World Trade Center attack. His last words to his wife were, "Don't worry, we're going to do something." He and some other passengers then stormed the cockpit, causing the hijackers to crash the plane into a Pennsylvania field rather than their intended target. Tom was undoubtedly a true and selfless hero. As we'll see, there were many heroes aboard Flight 93 that day. Welles Crowther, the man in the red bandana. Photo credit, Pinterest/David Armstrong. Welles Crowther has become the stuff of legend in the years since September 11, 2001. He is known as the man with red bandana. 24-year-old Welles was working as equities trader when Flight 175 struck the South Tower. He called his mother and left a message letting her know he was okay and then made his way downstairs. Along his way, he came across other groups of survivors, some of whom were badly injured. He began helping people down the stairway into safety. At one point, he even carried an injured woman on his back. As the smoke and dust began to worsen, Welles put a red bandana across his mouth. His father had given him the red bandana when he was a young boy, and Welles always carried it with him. Welles is thought to have helped at least 12 people to safety before he lost his life in the tower, many of whom recognize him by the bandana he wore. He was posthumously named an honorary New York City firefighter in 2006, and there is a documentary about him called Man in Red Bandana. One famous actor played a huge behind-the-scenes role in the aftermath of 9/11. Jeffrey Valls rushed in to help. Photo credit, Pinterest/Elizabeth Perilou. Jeffrey Valls followed in his father's footsteps at Ladder 9 in New York City when he left an engineering job to become a firefighter. He had a young wife and a 3-year-old son. He was also known to ride the bike to and from work. According to his sister Karen, Jeff was the type of guy you could always depend on. He had a warm smile, kind heart and a nice word to say. He was a gentle giant. As many other firefighters who lost their lives that fateful day, Jeff put others first and himself second. He ran into Tower 1 in an attempt to help others but was unable to get out before the building collapsed. Jeff's last moments in life were spent helping others. Another hero of Flight 93, Todd Beamer. Photo credit, Pinterest/Mary Ann Rizzo. 32-year-old father and husband Todd Beamer had just returned on a flight from Italy on September 10th. The next day, he departed on Flight 93 to San Francisco for work. After hijackers took control of the plane, Todd was instrumental in getting the other passengers to intervene. He spoke to airphone operator Lisa Jefferson while still in the air. He requested that she pray with him and that she deliver a message to his wife and children. Todd's famous last words were, "Are you ready? Okay. Let's roll," as they prepared to storm the cockpit. He and many others aboard Flight 93 were able to divert the plane from its intended target. They most likely saved hundreds more lives in the process by sacrificing themselves. We'll learn more about Lisa later. Actor Steve Buscemi was involved in a major way. Photo credit, Pinterest / Chris Swilling. It's not too commonly known that actor Steve Buscemi jumped into action on September 11. Steve, a native of New York, is best known for his work in films like Reservoir Dogs and The Big Lebowski, and TV shows such as Boardwalk Empire. However, before he embarked on his acting career, Steve was a firefighter. After 9/11, Steve returned to his old firehouse and began working with the crew to sift through the rubble at Ground Zero. Steve worked 12-hour shifts like the rest of the men there. He refused pictures and interviews and instead focused on the giant task ahead. Only years later did he comment on his actions in that time. Steve said, "It was a privilege to be able to do it. It was great to connect with the firehouse I used to work with and with some of the guys I worked alongside. And it was enormously helpful for me because while I was working, I didn't really think about it as much, feel it as much." Firefighter David Weiss had saved lives before. Photo credit, Pinterest / Sandy SKDCP. People said that firefighter David Weiss was a strapping sight, with his huge biceps. He had a constant drive to save other people. His selfless ways were why he ended up in his profession. David had previously done other selfless feats, like the time he jumped into a river in an attempt to save the driver of a car which had plunged into the water. Of that moment, fellow firefighter Thor Johansson said, "He just jumped, knowing that he was the person's only hope." It was no surprise that David helped others in the WTC on the 11th of September. He was on the 30th floor of the North Tower, heading up to rescue people on the 50th floor, when the building collapsed. Captain John Ogonifsky piloted Flight 11. Photo credit, Pinterest / Deborah McDonald. John Ogonifsky was the captain of American Airlines Flight 11. It was the first plane to be crashed into the World Trade Center. Captain Ogonifsky had previously been a Navy pilot who served in the Vietnam War. Many believe that Captain Ogonifsky attempted to thwart the hijackers from taking control of the plane, but he was sadly overpowered and murdered. After his death, the terrorists flew Flight 11 into the North Tower. He was survived by his wife and his 3 daughters. 10 years later, one of his daughters reflected, "9/11 will always be something that's a part of our lives." GTE phone dispatcher Lisa Jefferson. Photo credit, Pinterest / Henhouse. Lisa Jefferson played a behind-the-scenes role during September 11. She was a supervisor for the GTE Airphone supervisor. She was the dispatcher who ended up on the line when Todd Beamer made his mid-flight call. Jefferson stayed on the phone with him while he relayed what was happening in the air. Lisa also coincidentally had the same name as Todd's wife. In an interview with BeliefNet.com, Lisa shared that she believes God used her that particular day. She said, "Todd's wife called me a pillar of strength and told me that she was glad that I was the one to take the call and to be on the other end and to be there for her husband." Lisa promised Todd she would stay on the phone until the end, and she did, providing prayers and comfort. Mike Kehoe worked tirelessly to find the missing. Photo credit, Pinterest / Greg Postle. Mike Kehoe was a 33-year-old firefighter who was captured in one of the most famous photographs of 9/11 as he attempted to go up the stairs while everyone headed in the opposite direction, down to safety. Mike miraculously managed to escape the North Tower right before it collapsed. After the buildings collapsed, Mike worked 10-hour shifts to help recover his missing comrades. He later recounted in an interview with The Mirror, "Sure, I was frightened, but I was just doing my job and wish we could have done more." C.C. Lyles, police officer turned flight attendant. Photo credit, Pinterest / Mark Sizemore. Here is another hero from United Flight 93. C.C. Lyles was a flight attendant on that fated day. She had recently made a drastic career change when she left her job as a police officer to become a flight attendant. On September 11, the hijackers overpowered her and her fellow flight attendant, forcing them to open the cockpit. Then the terrorists overtook the pilots. Cece managed to call her husband Lorne, and spoke to him for the remainder of the flight. She told him the passengers were planning to storm the cockpit to prevent the plane from crashing into the Capitol. Cece managed to stay calm despite the terror unfolding around her. A statue has been erected in her honor in her hometown of Fort Pierce, Florida. Jeff Giordano was early to the scene. Photo credit, Pinterest/Gear Up Foundation. On September 11, Ladder 3 firefighter Jeffrey Giordano appeared on TV to discuss an event benefiting the firefighters' burn center. He called his wife early that morning to let his children know that they could see him on air. Only hours later he called again as he was rushing to the World Trade Center. Jeffrey was a highly decorated firefighter and saved many people over his career. His firehouse was one of the first units to respond to the scene. He was killed that day, along with 11 colleagues from Ladder 3. His wife Marie said he was devoted to excellence. She recalled, "If someone said, 'That's good enough,' Jeff's response would be, 'That's the problem with the world, people think it's okay to accept less than perfect.'" Danielle Howell, Gilbert-Sinac/Gamma Refer/Getty Images. Dulles Airport Air Traffic Control Dispatcher Danielle Howell was the last person to speak to American Airlines Flight 77, en route to Washington, D.C. As she and the rest of the air traffic controllers watched what was unfolding, they knew something was drastically wrong and alerted their supervisor as they watched the plane crash into the side of the Pentagon. Danielle and her colleagues also worked to let other pilots know about the hijacked aircraft. Danielle was traumatized by the event, however, she found hope in the tragedy. She ended up getting married to the air traffic controller who worked next to her that day, Thomas Howell. Danielle spoke of the bond between herself and Thomas. "Something that you could never describe, because you were there, you saw it together, you experienced it together." Betty Young alerted ground crew to the tragedy. Photo credit, Pinterest/John Rapinski. Betty Young was a flight attendant aboard American Airlines Flight 11, the first plane to be hijacked on September 11. Betty was the one to alert the crew on the ground what was taking place. She stayed on the phone for over 25 minutes relaying details about the event. Betty was able to provide the seat numbers of the hijackers, which was vital in later identifying who the men were. She remained remarkably calm throughout the entirety of the call despite the desperation of the situation. Betty is remembered for her bravery and tenacity in relaying critically important information that day. Father Michael Judge provided comfort. Photo credit, Pinterest/Lucia Olson-Smith. Father Michael Judge was the subject of one of the most moving and memorable photos taken on September 11. Father Judge was a Catholic priest who served as a chaplain for the New York City Fire Department. On the 11th of September he rushed to the World Trade Center where he began to pray for the victims, offer aid, and administer last rites to some. He was in the North Tower praying aloud, "Jesus, please end this right now. God, please end this." Moments later the South Tower collapsed and sent debris throughout the building. Many people were hit by debris, which killed Father Judge. Firefighters were photographed carrying his body out of the building. His was labeled as Victim 0001, as the first to be identified after the attacks. Bob Beckwith was one of the first responders. Photo credit, Pinterest/Karen Anch. Firefighter Bob Beckwith was one of the first responders to the World Trade Center site on the 11th of September. He was famously photographed alongside President George Bush in the aftermath of the building's collapse. Bob was a retired firefighter who bluffed his way past barricades to administer aid. September 11th was a particularly tragic day for Bob. That morning his grandson had been hit by a car while going to school. Bob accompanied the child to the hospital and after he knew he would be okay, immediately made his way to the Twin Towers. He began searching for missing people and assisted with bucket brigades. Moira Smith will always be remembered for her heroism. Photo credit, Pinterest/Lives2Shop 247. Moira Smith was a police officer and the first NYPD officer to report the terrorist attack after she witnessed the plane crash into the World Trade Center. She immediately went to the towers and began attempting to evacuate people. This iconic photo of her helping an injured man, with blood streaming down his face, is thought to be the last of Moira. Moira was the only female officer to be killed at Ground Zero. Moira was selfless in attempting to help others, and many survivors recall her leading them out. Because of her actions, along with those of her fellow police officers and firefighters, it is thought that thousands of lives were saved that day. Marilyn Wills helped lower people to safety. Photo credit, Pinterest/Patricia Lavelle. Lieutenant Colonel Marilyn Wills was a seasoned military officer who worked at the Pentagon. She was there on September 11 when a plane smashed into the building. As smoke quickly grew thicker and thicker, almost making it impossible for people to breathe, Marilyn continued on with her colleagues. She helped her peers escape. They formed a human chain, crawling on the ground and carefully inching their way out. At one point, Marilyn even told a colleague to get onto her back if she couldn't crawl any further. She and her fellow Army officers lowered people out of the window before finally reaching safety herself. Rick Rescorla had prepared everyone for a day like this. Photo credit, Pinterest/Sophia Robinson. Retired United States Army officer Rick Rescorla was working as the head of security at Morgan Stanley on the 44th floor when tragedy struck. Rick was there during the bombing at the Trade Center in 1993 and believed that the towers were still a target for terrorists. He even predicted that a plane might be flown into them one day. He implemented security procedures for Morgan Stanley, including having practice evacuations every 3 months. On the 11th of September, Rick systematically helped the firm's 1,000 employees out by ordering them through the stairways. He sang a Cornish battle song to boost morale, as he had done for his troops in Vietnam. After someone told him that he also needed to evacuate, Rick said, "As soon as I make sure everyone else is out." He was last seen heading up the 10th floor when the tower collapsed. Stephen Siller ran to the towers on foot. Photo credit, Pinterest/Debbie Burner. A firefighter with Brooklyn Squad 1, Stephen Siller came from a difficult background. He was orphaned by the age of 8, but he still found it within himself to be of service to others. Stephen had been scheduled to play a game of golf with his brothers on the morning of September 11. However, he rushed to the Twin Towers once he became aware of the tragedy. Stephen strapped 60 pounds of gear to his back and ran on foot to get to the WTC, as the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel was closed to traffic. Stephen lost his life while helping to save the lives of those around him that day. Mark Bingham was a hero many times during his life. Photo credit, Pinterest/Dan Horton. Mark Bingham was another passenger aboard Flight 93. He was a 6'4" rugby player and was known for having previously acting heroically, having used his size to stop several muggings. Mark owned a public relations firm. He thwarted stereotypes by playing for one of the first gay-inclusive rugby teams. Mark was one of the Flight 93 passengers who worked together to storm the cockpit. Before their final mission, Mark called his mother and told her that he loved her very much. His mother, Alice Hoagland, is a former flight attendant. Since Mark's death, she has become a world-renowned expert on airline safety as well as an activist for LGBTQ issues in memory of heroic son.